Hi, I'm Thomas the Accidental DM, and today we're going to have a first look at Cthulhu Invictus for the 7th edition version of Call of Cthulhu. Now, I know this is one that isn't all that new. It came out a couple of years ago as a part of a Kickstarter, but it's been one that I've been kind of interested in getting a hold of, and I finally found a copy of it. Now, Cthulhu Invictus is available, I believe, as a PDF through Golden Goblin Press's website, or you can also purchase it if you want a hardcover, or not a hardcover, but want a softcover version of it through DriveThruRPG. I found this one actually in a game shop and had it shipped to me. So this is the one that we're going to be taking a look at today. So Cthulhu Invictus, the 7th edition guide. So let's open her up and see what's inside. Okay, as usual, we'll go first to the table of contents. Pretty well packed in here, but it seems there's a lot of stuff to kind of fit in these 190, 200 pages that we have. There's a forward and introduction. Chapter 1, Salve Citizens. So what is Cthulhu Invictus? A brief timeline, the Shadow War. So again, it's a lot of those things we typically see at the very first chapter of any role-playing game, kind of setting the scene, letting us know a little bit about what's going on, etc. Chapter 2 then goes directly into creating characters for Cthulhu Invictus. So there's status. Now, this will be interesting, slave and women investigators, because the ancient world was a lot different than our world today in many ways, and so there would probably need to be some discussion a little bit about how that particular topic is going to be discussed in here. Roman naming conventions, Roman name generator. Chapter 3, investigator occupations. Chapter 4, investigator skills. Chapter 5, life and death, combat, poison, and healing. So wounds, death, dying, and recovering, armor and weapons. Okay, so very much kind of making sure we have then the stats that would probably be necessary for the world of ancient Rome. Chapter 6, the spiritual world, so getting a little bit of the pantheon then probably of the ancient Romans. Romans of the other world, optional rules, ill omens, religions, philosophical disciplines, faith and luck, insanity in the empire, and augury. So consulting the gods and figuring out what happens or what the desire is. Then chapter 7 is magic, eldritch tomes, and mystical artifacts. Rome, magic and the law, the fallen kingdoms, spells, etc. Chapter 8 then we have specifically on the monsters of Cthulhu Invictus. Section on mankind, mythology, and the mythos. Chapter 9 will then be on cults, patrons, and investigator organizations. Chapter 10, the Roman legions, history and innovations, military ranks and command structure. So if you're going to be playing a soldier, would be my guess is how then that really kind of fits in. Because again, it's not one of those things that would be necessarily intuitive to a lot of us with kind of a modern understanding of the way that armies might work. So there would be a little bit of difference there. Chapter 11, then it breaks it down into the various Roman provinces. So we have the home province, so kind of around Rome, then the islands, the Gallic provinces, the German province, Britannia, Hispania, North Africa, southwest section of the empire, the eastern section of the empire, eastern provinces, just kind of going through a whole list of kind of the way that the structure, the setup of the Roman world was at. Chapter 12 is a very, very brief tour of the city of Rome. Now that might be interesting to kind of take a look at just for personally, because I'm currently living in Rome, and just to kind of see then how that might kind of be set up and what some of the similarities are. Probably more differences than there are similarities, but you never know. Sample map, some key locations. Then we have Heroes of the Shadow War special backer NPCs. Okay, so because this was originally a Kickstarter, so you're going to see some of that kind of put in there probably because of some of the categories, pledge categories that were there. Then character sheet specifically for Cthulhu Invictus. And then there seems to be two scenarios. One, Blood and Glory by Oscar Rios, and Food for Worms by Chad Bowser. And if I remember correctly, both of those are the two main people for Cthulhu Invictus. Yeah, I see Oscar Rios here, and then Chad Bowser as well. Okay, so there are definitely two people that are involved in it. Just kind of taking a little bit in here to kind of take a look at the book itself. One thing, because just the type of printing it is, it doesn't always necessarily lay flat like we see with a hardbound book. But that's just, one of the things of getting copies that are soft covers. So again, we see here then Chapter 1, Salve Hello Citizens. So what is Cthulhu Invictus? The 7th edition guide to Cthulhu Invictus is the book you are reading now. We use Cthulhu Invictus as a shortened title and Cthulhu Invictus to refer to the setting for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. The place is the Roman Empire and what lies beyond. The time is the late age of the Antonines, 145 AD, but with very little effort, these rules can work for nearly any period of Roman history, from the Roman Republic to the Byzantine Empire. And then we see then kind of a brief little timeline, the royal period, which isn't always looked too favorably upon by the Romans themselves. Then you have the Republican period, then the Imperial Age, of course, which goes until the end of the empire in the West. And then a little bit about the period specifically that you would be dealing with as it's set up in this particular book itself. Okay, so just kind of going through Roman miscellany. Chapter 2, creating investigators for Cthulhu Invictus. Okay, and we look down here, there's a section on age and aging. It's not quite what we would necessarily see in the normal playbook, investigator's handbook, just because some of the deductions that we would see for later characters kind of happening a little bit earlier, it seems. But you do get kind of the improvement checks for education seems to happen a little earlier as well. So let's see, what else do we have in here? So these are the various statuses one can have. Then we get into Roman naming conventions with the praenomen, the nomen and cognomen, and the honorifics, which if you've ever done any Latin when you were in high school, you're probably somewhat familiar with those. Then we have some investigator occupations. It'd be interesting to kind of see what we have listed down as some of the investigator occupations. So we have an advocate, an apothecary, an archer, artist and craftsman, an augur, a barbarian, bards, bodyguard, druid, laborer, philosopher, prefect, priest or priestess, a publican, resistance leader, a scope. I'm not familiar with a scope, but I'm not that much into I don't know a whole lot about ancient Roman history either. I know some, but not a lot. So there's scope, a soothsayer, surgeon, teachers, thieves, and a writer. Okay, and then we have a little bit of background on each of those then. And just because I didn't know what a scope was, let's just take a quick look at that one then, just for the heck of it. So where is that at? Unfortunately, you do see slaves and slavers because that is a part of the world that we're dealing with in this case. So, but a scope. You hail from the lands beyond the empire's northern borders, typically Germanic territory. When you're the keeper of your tribe's lore, passed down from your most distant ancestors, your mind is filled with the legends of your people, their achievements, every birth and death of note, every victory and defeat, every sacrifice. Okay, so this is kind of like the historian or the bard or the keeper of tales for the Germanic tribes. Okay. So that might be an interesting character play, specifically if you're dealing with a lot of the things having to do with the ethos, the mythos then of this world. Investigators' equipment, hats and loincloths, the panulas, the palas, the sagums, are just all the things that would typically be a part of the kind of the ancient world. Investigators' skills. Let's see. Some of these we would be very familiar with the Call of Cthulhu as it is, with things like accounting and appraise and arts and crafts, but there are a few that are a little bit different. A teamster. Then you have, Cthulhu Mythos, Empire, of course. So I would assume that's knowing a lot more about the knowledge of the empire, its histories, its laws, its traditions, etc. Languages, natural world. Again, a lot of these are ones we would typically see in Call of Cthulhu, but here's one. Oratory and rhetoric would be specific to the Roman world. Pilot boat. Let's see, sleight of hand, shield, spot hidden, status, or infamy stealth. Okay, so again, those are ones that would be similar to what we're kind of used to seeing. Maybe the divisions of those might be a little different of the starting, kind of the base numbers for those. Combat, poisons, and healings. Then we see wounds, death, dying, and recovery. Let's see. The rules for damage, the difference between minor and major wounds, and whether an investigator is knocked unconscious or killed are in Chapter 6 of the Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition Keeper Rulebook, as are the rules for recovery for both regular and major wounds and the rules for first aid and medicine. However, keepers wishing to add a further level of detail to their investigator's recovery may use the rules for infections. Throughout Roman history, victims of minor injuries or superficial wounds would find themselves racked with fever and infection, battling for their lives. Okay, so very much it's a lot of it then kind of setting into kind of the medical era of the time. That small cuts could potentially be life-threatening. So even though you might not get what would be considered kind of a major wound from an action, it could still be a life-threatening thing because of the era, the time period that you're living in. Types of armor, soft leather, hardened leather, leather and rings. So just a lot of that we expect to see for this time period. Weapons then, fighting axe, bows, crossbows, spears, swords. We have a picture, of course, here of the gladius. But there's also then long swords for the Spatha and barbarians' weapons, such as the falcata, etc. Okay, so a lot then of the kind of the background and giving you the things that you might need in order to play in this particular world. And then we have the section 6 on the spiritual world. The world of Cthulhu Invictus is one in which people struggle to maintain balance between their lives and the whims of the gods. Roman citizens were especially superstitious about this balance, and these were no small matters to be laughed off or ignored. The auguries are read before major life events, such as starting a business or a battle. Religious rituals are dutifully performed by the state, lest the empires be plunged into ruin and chaos by wrathful gods. In temples, shrines, and holy places across the empire, citizens make sacrifices and lay offerings at the feet of 1,000 different gods from 100 different lands. Countless religions and schools of philosophy offer people a path to protection, enlightenment, and happiness in this life and in the next. Because we have to remember, at this time period, kind of the understanding of religiosity, of spirituality, of the spiritual world is a lot different than our modern understanding of things. And so it does play a very strong, important role then in people's lives, more than they may seem today. And so it's good to have then kind of this section to kind of remind us and how this is going to play in with everything that's happening. And then we can see some of the various options that we see, kind of the traditional pantheon, Olympian pantheon, the Sibyl, the imperial cult, which probably this time period I would guess is probably winding down a little bit, considering kind of the beginning. Nope. I was just about to say the beginnings of Christianity, but if I remember my history correctly, that doesn't happen until to probably a couple of centuries later. So it is definitely going to be on the rise. The cult of Isis and Osiris, then the Jewish religion, Mithraism, and then the beginnings of Christianity as well. And then some of the philosophical disciplines that would be important at the age: Stoicism, Epicureanism, skepticism, and then augury, astrology, and oracles. Okay, so very much kind of fitting that in. I just saw this before we pass on. Then insanity in the empire. Invariably, some investigators will succumb to madness, driven to insanity by the terrible things they witness by protecting the empire from forces older than humanity. Okay, to most citizens of the empire, the common image of the insane are wandering madmen, dangerous and prone to sudden violence. Okay, so then there's a section here on care for the insane, home and family care. Okay, so status times 2. Okay, so just kind of some directions on kind of how that's going to be playing out. Then, of course, we have section 7, or chapter 7 on magic, eldritch tomes, and mystical artifacts. We'll just find a quick one here to take a look at. Let's do, why not, the Lost Histories of Herodotus. Rare copies in Greek, Herodotus or unknown authors, 440 BC. Okay, and then just kind of list that. So this is kind of a tome to kind of read. And in it, there's renowned among scholars, but many doubt the veracity of its writings. He wrote of fox-eyed ants in Persia, preying on camels and mining gold, snakes flying with bat wings in India, headless humanoids in Libya, cyclopses filching gold from griffins in Scythia. Okay, so getting kind of the kind of a look into kind of the mythos area that we're dealing with. There is a sanity loss then, of course, Cthulhu mythos that's gained by it, cult mythos rating, kind of amount of time it takes you to take 48 weeks, and some suggested spells that might be associated specifically with having looked then at the lost histories of Herodotus. So very cool in the sense of kind of giving us seeds for games and whatnot. Chapter 8 then is going to be on monsters, and by the looks of it so far, yeah, it's very much focusing on a lot on kind of those ancient creatures that we know from mythology. So we have the hound Cerberus here. And giving kind of the stats for Cerberus, the guardian hounds of Hades, the Chimera. What else do we have? Cyclopses and dryads, giants. What else do we have? Harpies, of course, Hydra, griffins. All right, so yeah, all these are from kind of ancient Roman and a little bit of Greek mixed in from a couple things I've kind of saw through here. Of the different monsters from antiquity in the mythology of the Greco-Roman world. Chapter 9 then, cults, patrons, and investigator organizations. So some cults: Eternal Fellowship, Children of the Dark Venus, the Claw, Heralds of the Deep. Okay. Then we have patrons. I wonder if it talks about, how is it going to talk about patrons? About patrons, in the days of the Republic, wealthy patricians, patrons started giving daily gifts of money. Okay, so very much going into the historical element of patronage in the old Roman world, kind of the quote-unquote paterfamilias, and their responsibility to people that were below them, and then those that were below them had responsibility to those that were their patrons, and back and forth like that. Investigator organizations, the Awoken, the Army of Metilius, the Honored Freed. Then, of course, we have Chapter 10 on the Roman legions. So history and invasion, training and discipline, enemies of road, rank and command, military kit. And then, oh, good, we have some that are specifically kind of named. I won't say because I do not know for certain if these are kind of named important legions in those particular areas that it's talking about. But the Rhine legions, legions of Britannia, African legions, Eastern legions, the Illyrian legions, how they even get leave, because that is a difficult thing in the old ancient Roman world. When you were a member of the army, it's not like you got shore leave on a regular basis, and it wasn't a job that you only had for a couple of years and then went on to do other things. It was your life for a very long time. Then we have the breakdown of the Roman world itself into the various provinces and how that's kind of get divided. And because this is happening of the time period in the kind of early, mid-ish 2nd century, it's going to be focusing then on the way it was divided up at that particular time into the various provinces. And we kind of see that kind of being played out here. Cyrenaica, Aegyptus, Africa Proconsularis, in the eastern provinces of Cappadocia, Syria, Cilicia, Bithynia, and Pontus, and then the Greek provinces. So we see Macedonia here, of course, Epirus, Dalmatia, Pannonia Superiore, Pannonia Inferiore, and the Alpine provinces. Okay, and then the city of Rome itself. Okay, so we can see here the kind of the Colosseum right off the bat, right on the opposite page over here. This will be the briefest tours of Rome, which is very unfortunate considering the beauty of Rome, especially ancient Rome, the capital of the empire. An entire book twice this size would be needed to cover the great city with any sort of justice. Throughout, we use Roman leagues and give the equivalent in modern miles. The capital of the Roman Empire, Rome, began as a city-state build, so a little bit of the history. Some of the major roads, the Via Appia, Via Aurelia, Via Cornelia, Flaminia, Via Latina, etc. They're part of that. Okay, and then it has a good map that would be used for playing games set within the city of Rome itself. There's a section here on Rome after dark. A Roman day is exactly that, a day. Romans begin their day promptly at sunrise and go about their business until the sun goes down. After that, it's best to where you need to be and stay there until morning. Rome is a city without public street lights, and after dark, it'd be a dangerous place. Traveling the streets of Rome requires a torch. Okay, so just kind of a reminder that things aren't quite as safe once you go off and once the sun sets. The Vestal Virgins, the various temples, the Pantheon, etc. All right, then we have some sample maps in here of kind of a Roman house, rural house of Villa Insula, Heroes of the Shadow War. Okay, so this would be the backers from the Kickstarter campaign. And I'll just kind of take a look at the character sheet. A lot of things we're used to seeing typically in a character sheet for any Call of Cthulhu, but this one is very, very flavored for Cthulhu Invictus, by your player occupation, your social class, etc., your normal characteristics, strength, appearance, dexterity, your skills that you have. And here, because of the fact that we're dealing with Cthulhu Invictus and not our typical 1920 setting, you do have a section here for armor, but then you have weapons, of course, and your combat bonus damage, etc. down here. And on the back, we see again what we're used to seeing at the back of one. And then we go into the scenarios. I don't want to go into the scenarios too much because, of course, I never want to spoil those, but we will take a quick look at just kind of the introductions. So this is the first one, Blood and Glory. And if I remember correctly, this is the one by Oscar Rios. Let me check real quick just to make sure. Yes, by Oscar Rios. The scenario takes place during a 3-day holiday celebrated with gladiatorial games. Precisely where or when is up to individual keepers. The scenario can take place in any large city of the empire so long as there is a marketplace, a local slum, and an amphitheater. For simplicity's sake, the scenario is written to take place in the city of Rome. The marketplace is Trajan's markets on the Quirinal Hill. The slum is Rome's Subura neighborhood. Amphitheater is the Flavian Amphitheater, also known as the Colosseum. All right, so something strange is going to be happening during this kind of holiday. And Rome, particularly as the years kind of progressed, maybe not so much in the 2nd century, in which the time period we're dealing with here, but as it progressed more and more and Rome started to kind of fall into decay, that was one of the things that a lot of the emperors used to try to maintain control, was definitely about having these games. And so it'd be interesting, it'd be fun to kind of see how that kind of plays out then with this particular one of Blood and Glory. But we're not going to go any more into it because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who has not gone through this one before. So we'll skip over then now to the second one that's put in here, Food for Worms, which unfortunately I do not remember who is the author of this one, but let's take a quick look. Chad Bowser. Okay. So just looking then, of course, at kind of the introduction to kind of an idea of what we're dealing with for this Food for Worms. Plague is sweeping across Rome, and over 1,000 people a day are dying from it and then returning to life. There's no rational explanation for this, and in Rome, rational means religious. Even the priests can't explain why this is happening, and that's unnerving everyone, including the emperor. The scenario draws from the actual Roman legend of Nero Redivius, a returned Nero. Several times during Roman history, people have come forward claiming to be Nero returned from the dead. That's strange, considering how hated, that would probably be the best way to put it, how hated Nero was, especially towards kind of the end of his life, that they actually even would bury his palace in Rome so that they would never have to look at it again after his death. But anyway, the second scenario is kind of taking place as one of the return of one of these false Neros during a time of plague, which makes sense then if we're going to be calling it the Food for Worms. So that then is that scenario. And again, we don't want to really spoil any of it, so we won't look too much into it. What else do we have? So in closing, the powerful hound barked wildly over the howling wind and crashes of thunder and lightning. The grass was wet, which would make climbing the steep hill difficult. They could hear the loud chanting coming from the top of the hill. It was a strange language and spoken in booming yet feminine voice. They could smell the fetid stench of their adversary and see its passage in huge footprints and bent trees leading up the sides of the tall, flat-topped hills where they were told strange ancient stones stood. But they could not see their foe. No one could, for the thing was not completely from this dimension, and therefore did not obey any rules of this world. Okay, so yeah, it's definitely been. I could say one thing about it. It definitely has the flavor of ancient Rome, I think, kind of throughout it. And if that's what you're looking for in terms of a kind of a setting book, at least just the brief little bit that I've kind of been looking at in here, it very much kind of sets that tone. It gives you the pieces that you need in order to kind of really set a world, that truthfulness, that ability to kind of delve and really kind of set the setting and mood. I think this seems, at least from what I'm taking a look at, seems to kind of have a big part of that. And then the two scenarios, at least they've got some interesting hooks in order to kind of get us to kind of want to say, hey, this might be something that I might be interested in kind of going into and dealing with. I mean, we're dealing with a festival. Anything can happen during a festival. So what's that going to mean? And since a lot of the festivals are revolving around kind of the rites of the gods and how that works, that would then create kind of a situation in which you might be dealing then with some of those pieces of the mythos. And of course then, with the second scenario, whenever there's a plague, there's always going to be something that's dealing with the mythos when you're dealing with a Call of Cthulhu scenario. So we all know that. But anyway, thanks for joining me and taking a look then at this first look at Cthulhu Invictus, which, as I said, I know it kind of came out a little while ago. It was copyright 2018, so it's a few years old, but it's kind of my first opportunity to delve into it. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and if you have other things that you would be interested in me taking a look at, kind of as a first flip through, that you've kind of been wanting to see as well, just kind of let me know. Please comment, like, and subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. And until next time, I'm Thomas, the Accidental DM. Thanks very much.